Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm excited to see you all trickling into our webinar today. As you trickle in, please in the chat, if you feel comfortable doing so, share your name, your organizations, your pronouns, if you feel comfortable doing that, so we can get um, a better understanding of who's in the room and who we're sharing space with us today. So yeah, welcome to Foster Youth Speaks, Trends and Insights from RHEP's 2023 Biannual Youth Survey on Sexual and Reproductive Health. We are really delighted to have you here today. We've been working on this for a while now, and so we're really excited to share our findings with you all. And so we have a lot of information to cover, so please, so sorry, we have a lot of information to cover today, so let's go ahead and jump right in. I see a lot of comments coming into the chat, so thank you for adding those in. And please continue to do so. All right, so I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Cindy. My pronouns are she and her. I'm the director of the Reproductive Health Equity Project for Foster Youth at the National Center for Youth Law. My co-presenter today is Grace McLean, and I'm going to give her a chance to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm a senior evaluation consultant with Seedling Consulting Group, who helps with this evaluation, the administration of the survey, and
Thank you, Grace. Grace and her team at Seedling are part of the group of folks who made this survey and report happen. So we'll tell you a little bit more about that in the next few slides. So we have two really exciting panels for you today as part of our webinar. Our first panel, in our first panel, we will be joined by Caroline and Michael from the LA County Department of Children and Family Services. Caroline and Michael and their team at DCFS have played a huge role in ensuring that social workers in LA County are supported and have the resources that they need to support youth in foster care in accessing sexual and reproductive health information and services. So we're really excited to talk to them today to hear more about the work that they've been doing and what they've learned, the successes that they've had as well. Our second panel is going to feature three of our amazing Youth Advisory Board members at RHEP. We have Brandy, Lawnell, and Mariah joining us today. We're going to hear from them and get a little bit more insight on their thoughts on the findings that we share, what surprised them, what didn't surprise them, and what their advice is for professionals working with youth in care. So I know that by now, many of you all are familiar with Zoom, we're familiar with webinar. We've been doing it for quite some time now, but just as a brief reminder to ask questions, please use that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can ask questions to myself or to the panelists there. We will have time at the end of our webinar for to answer questions. So hopefully we'll have a good 10-15 minutes to do that. So please share your questions in there. We will answer them either live or via chat. And if we get overwhelmed with questions and are not able to get to all of them before the webinar ends, then we will make sure to follow up on those questions via a follow-up email. So before we jump in, we are going to be talking about data today. And so we want to just give a quick note on language. So at RHEP, we believe that all people deserve comprehensive reproductive and sexual health education and care. And we really strive to use inclusive language in this presentation and really beyond in our day-to-day and in all of our projects. But there are times when we will need to use gendered language, such as the word women or female, or race-specific or specific race ethnicity categories, such as the word Hispanic. And that's because we need to conform with the data in the way that it was collected. Okay, so a little bit about RHEP. What is RHEP? So RHEP stands for the Reproductive Health Equity Project for Foster Youth. And the goal of RHEP is to ensure that the child welfare system, including key health and caregiver partners, have embedded practices, tools, and cultures that are designed in partnership with young people that actively normalize, support, and promote the bodily autonomy and healthy sexual development of youth in foster care. RHEP is a collective impact campaign. It's made up of multidisciplinary organizations, government agencies, and of course, young people. Our original project was founded in 2016 by a cross-sector leadership team based in LA County. However, in the last couple of years, we really have wanted to expand out into the rest of the state of California and have been slowly doing that. So we're excited that our partnerships are growing and expanding to include partners throughout the state of California. As I shared, RHEP is a collective impact campaign, and what that means is that we work with our partners. We have shared goals, we have shared measurements, we have a shared agenda, all in an effort to help us create systemic change and to ensure that young folks in foster care are supported when it comes to their healthy sexual development. So the work that you will hear about today, this is a project that was done in collaboration with several of our partners in RHEP, including Seedling Consulting Group, the Children's Law Center of California, the National Center for Youth Law, and of course, RHEP's Youth Advisory Board. So I'm going to jump in and tell you a little bit about why we did this survey that we're going to be telling you about today. So in 2019, 2021, and 2023, we dove in to conduct a survey that asked foster youth 3 different things. So first, we asked them about their sources of sexual health information. We also asked them about the support that they were receiving when it came to sexual and reproductive health. And third, we asked them about the barriers to care that they were facing, again, in terms of sexual and reproductive health. And it was a giant undertaking, but why did we do it? So there were several reasons why we decided to do this work. So when RHEP was started, it was started in 2016, as I mentioned, youth in care were facing disproportionately poor sexual health outcomes. There is a study that's pretty widely known called the California Youth Transitions to Adulthood Study. It's also known as the Cal Youth Study, which was conducted by Mark Courtney and colleagues. And the study was carried over a 10-year period, so from 2012 to 2022. And it followed a cohort of young people and interviewed them at the ages of 17, 19, and 21. So the insights that stats that you see here are some of the things that we learned from that study. So you can see here that some of the things that we learned are there almost 50% of female identified young people in foster care in California reported having been pregnant at least once by the age of 19. We learned that almost 70% of these young people said that their pregnancy was not intentional. And while many of them said their pregnancy was not intentional, only about 28% were using contraception at the time of conception. Now, this is really important because it shows us that clearly youth in care are facing many barriers when it comes to accessing sexual and reproductive health services and information. This that you see here is from, aside from young people in foster care who do decide to parent, also are experiencing poor health outcome. This data that you're seeing here is from a recent report that was released by the California Department of Social Services. And this report focused on the reproductive and maternal health outcomes of young people in California's foster care system. What we learned from this report is that when it came to like prenatal and postpartum care, youth in care doing not as well as compared to youth who are not in foster care. So we see here that only about 55% of youth ages 10 to 20 in California receive timely prenatal care compared to 65% of the same age youth not in foster care. When we're looking or talking about timely prenatal care, we're talking about receiving care within that first trimester of pregnancy or within 42 days of Medi-Cal enrollment. The same is true for postpartum care. So what we learned is also that foster youth in California foster care were less likely to receive postpartum care. Only about 53% of youth ages 10 to 20 received timely postpartum care, as compared to 67% of the same age youth not in foster care. And when we're talking about timely postpartum care, we're looking at receiving care between 7 and 84 days after delivery. I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but this report is from 2023, but the data was pulled from 2020, and it's Medi-Cal data. So these outcomes only tell part of the story. So it's important to name that disproportionately poor outcomes are impacting young people who are already parts of vulnerable groups that are facing systemic barriers to quality healthcare simply because of who they are. So for example, 23% of youth in care nationally identify as Black, compared to just 14% in the general population. 30% identify as LGBTQ compared to 11% in the general population. And these identities often intersect with each other, creating even more barriers for young people. So we know that LGBTQ youth often report delaying care for fear of discrimination. Same is true for youth of color, who report concerns about discrimination when it comes to accessing care, as well as sexual and reproductive health care. And beyond their own perceptions, it's just well documented that racial bias in healthcare leads to differences when it comes to treatment and health outcomes. So in addition to medical barriers, we also see barriers within the child welfare system. There's often biases regarding the culture of young people's families, their values, the values of youth themselves, which can often lead to child welfare workers and caregivers often making assumptions about values regarding the sexual health or regarding early parenting, which can influence the support that they provide to young people in terms of sexual and reproductive health. Another reason that we wanted to do this study is because we realized that the data we wanted wasn't necessarily out there. The CWS and CMS database, which is a database that's used by the child welfare system, asks caseworkers to document parenting, but this is via caseworker reports, so not youth reports, and it doesn't capture any additional data outside of parenting. The Cal Youth study, which I already mentioned, was incredibly helpful, but as you can see, it was a specific point in time, and it was just one study. So we wanted more information. We really wanted something that we can do over multiple years to track changes over time. At the time that we started this work, RHEP was engaged in several pieces of legislation. We were working on policy change. We were collaborating with several agencies, and we wanted to see if the work that we were doing was making a difference. We also wanted to make sure that we got the perspective of young people and not only of the adults in their lives. We wanted to be able to pull data that was disaggregated to understand if different youth were experiencing things differently. And critically, we wanted to go beyond outcomes and understand the journey and barriers that youth were or were not facing. So with all that being said, now we're going to jump into the what and the how. And so Grace, I'm going to pass it over to you to share a little bit more about that with us.
Cindy, and before we start, how does my audio sound?
We can hear you good. Well,
great. I've been experiencing some technical difficulties, so apologies for that. Yeah, so you can go to the next slide. We designed these survey questions to get at three things. So first is, what is child welfare, excuse me. RHEP partners help move legislation and policy to ensure that young people are getting access to sex ed, and that, getting back, sorry.
Oh, well, sorry about that.
thanks, Tricia.
Of course. One other thing we learned with COVID and Zoom is technical challenges, being flexible. So yeah, the survey that we put out had 3 sections. We're looking at how much caseworkers / social workers are engaging in the requirements that are set forth in SB 89. So are they talking about certain things which we'll go over? And also we wanted to hear from youth themselves. What were the barriers to them getting information and sexual reproductive health care? And then lastly, we wanted to find out from them, besides social workers, where did they go for information? So the survey's done in those 3 parts. And if we could go to the next slide. So there are over 4,000 youth. They had to have been in care for at least a year to be eligible to participate in the survey. They were randomly selected, and we went through, after going through all kinds of other permissions, if anyone has questions about how to do evaluations and work with youth in care, it's a lot more involved. But we also got attorney permissions and youth permission. Then we did the surveys in person, where youth were sitting in court, waiting for their court appointments, and also on the phone. The data was then, and I will say that Children's Law Center of Los Angeles collected all the data. They trained young adults who were former foster youth to be interviewers. They were amazing. And we trained them as well. We went through the survey. And then the survey was, all identifying information was removed to get to us. So if we could go to the next slide. So we ended up with 169 youth. To be eligible, they had to be between 12 and 20, and that's the age range that we got. The average age was 16. So this is the breakdown of demographics. For the sake of time, I'll let you all explore this on your own. And we can go to the next. Oh, I did just want to share that for the analyses, we also looked at all the demographics. So this is what Grace was going to talk a lot about, because she did this part, but we controlled for age, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity. We even controlled for, like, how did they take the survey? Was it in person or on the phone? So where there were significant differences by demographics, we note those in the report. So yeah, I will turn it back over to you all. And if anyone has questions about the analysis or survey or findings, we are happy to answer those.
Thanks, Marcia, and thanks for working with us with these tech difficulties we were having. But yeah, thank you for telling us a little bit more about how the data was collected. Okay, so I'm going to jump into the findings. What did we learn from talking to youth in LA County about their experiences? So before I jump in, I do want to give a disclaimer that we have a really, really great report that we would love for all of you to check out. As much as we would love to, we cannot cover all of the really important data that we got in our presentation today. And so we are going to share a link at the end of our webinar so that you can access that report. Please check it out. You don't have to read it from beginning, start to end, but you can dive into the sections that are specifically of interest to you. One of the things that I mentioned earlier is that it was important for us to gather disaggregated data. We won't be going too into detail about disaggregated data today. because of time, and also because of some of it was not statistically significant, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't still important. So we do encourage you all to check it out and dive into the report a little bit deeper. So as I jump into the findings, first I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about caseworker engagement and support. I'm quickly going to just talk to you about these quotes that you'll see here. These are from a study which was done on pregnancy and foster care. This study was done pre-policy in California. So before there was policy in place that required social workers to talk about specific topics and that required training for social workers. I'm going to talk about that in the next slide, but you can see just from those quotes that there are some real barriers. There can be some real barriers for social workers when it comes to having conversations with youth on sexual and reproductive health if the support and infrastructure are not in place. So talking about policy, the Foster Youth Sexual Health Education Act, also known as SB 89, went into effect in 2017, and it requires certain things. So it requires social workers to talk to young people about their rights regarding sexual and reproductive health, and I'm going to dive deeper into that in the next slide. It asks social workers to talk to youth about how to access reproductive and sexual health care services and facilitate youth access to that care, including removing any barriers to care if youth request the supports. Social workers must also ensure that youth are receiving, that foster youth are receiving comprehensive sexual health education at least once in middle school and once in high school. And if youth are not receiving that instruction in school, that they find a program that's community-based where they can access that education. And last but not least, it requires training for social workers as well as caregivers and judges on sexual and reproductive health issues. To zoom in a little bit on what social workers must inform youth on, they must inform youth on their rights to access age-appropriate, medically accurate information about reproductive and sexual health care, their right to consent to sexual and reproductive health services, and their right to confidentiality regarding those services. So a really exciting finding for us this year is that the percentage of social workers who address sexual and reproductive health development topics with youth increased significantly over the last 6 years in LA County. So you can see here over 3/4 or 76% of youth reported that their social worker talked to them about at least one sexual and reproductive health topic in the previous 12 months. The survey asked specifically about certain topics that were addressed, and for all of the topics except for birth control and STIs, the percentage of youth who reported conversations increased significantly. So these are really promising results and continue to trend in the right direction. That said, we'd love to see, of course, 100% of youth receiving this information, meaning that our work isn't done. There's still work that can be done to continue supporting the implementation of SB 89, but we have seen really positive trend in these conversations going up, which is really, really good news. You can see here the growth across the years from the previous surveys that we did. And while SB 89 requires that social workers begin to have these conversations with youth starting at age 10, as in previous years, younger youth were less likely to report that their social worker had a conversation with them on all topics compared to older youth. So 67% of younger youth reported conversations compared to 78% of older youth between the ages of 14 and 21. We don't know what the reasons are, but it's possible that it could just be varying perceptions when it comes to youth readiness or comfort when it comes to having these conversations, or maybe social workers feeling a little bit more unprepared to have this discussion with younger youth. We're not sure, but we are interested in continuing to find out and being able to better support folks so that younger youth can receive the conversations as well. So that being said, though, we did see that the percentage of younger youth reporting conversations on sexual and reproductive health topic with their social worker has increased dramatically. So although it's not quite as high as the older youth, the conversations with younger youth have increased. So these topics that you see here are topics that our social workers are required to cover by law. So in 2023, 43% of younger youth reported that their social worker spoke to them about their right to have their questions answered and get sexual and reproductive health information from a reliable source. So compared to just 18% of younger youth in 2021. And in 2023, 33% of younger youth reported that their social worker spoke to them about their rights to sexual and reproductive health care, compared to just 9% of younger youth reporting the same in 2021. So this is, again, really exciting news, and shows a lot of the work that has been going into LA County when it comes to the supporting the implementation of Senate Bill 89. And social workers, as I mentioned earlier, are also required to support young people. So zooming in quickly into what that looks like, each year social workers must inform all youth on their caseloads, aged 10 years and older and non-minor dependents, about how to access sexual and reproductive health services and facilitate youth access to that care, including removing any barriers to care if the youth requests that support. And so in 2023, more than 1 in 4 youth said that their social worker had done something to help them overcome at least one of the barriers that they faced in accessing sexual and reproductive health care and information. So here you can see some of the quotes that were, they're not direct quotes, but they're adapted from the insights that we got from young people during the survey. So, you know, the comments here that we see provide us a little bit of insight on what's going on the ground. For the young people who reported that their social workers were not helpful, they indicated that either the conversation didn't happen at all, or that the information that they were given was not informative, or the conversation itself was not informative. For youth that did feel supported by their social worker, they mentioned that the social worker not only provided them information, but they were very open, they helped them feel comfortable, and were willing to talk and listen to them about the subjects that they were interested in. So this tells us a lot. This tells us that it's not only important for the conversation to happen, but that the content of the conversation and the way the conversation happens, right, is also really important, and making sure that we are making young people feel comfortable, that we are seen as trusted adults is very important. All right, so I gave you all a lot of information, and we saw a lot of really exciting data. So we're going to jump into our first panel. And so I'd like to welcome Michael and Caroline, who are going to tell us a little bit about the work that they've been doing in LA County to support in the implementation of SB 89, tell us a little bit about, you know, what's worked, what are some of the lessons learned, and just what are things are looking like on the ground. So welcome, Michael and Caroline.
Thank you so much. We're really excited to be here today. We enjoy our collaboration with RHEP all the time. So thank you for having us. Michael's in the office today, so hopefully he will be able to partake in this. We sometimes have challenges with Wi-Fi in the office, unfortunately. I stayed home. So the Beagles and I are gonna do our best to give you the information that we can. So I don't know, Michael, are you available?
Yes, I am. I'm just staying muted to minimize the office background noise.
There you go. Well, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then I'll come back in.
Well, I'm Michael McColl-Moss, and I am one of the staff with the DCFS Child Welfare Health Services section. And SB 89 and the Expectant and Parenting Youth programs are a couple of the programs that are under my supervision. I supervise Caroline Christian, who is incredibly enthusiastic and knowledgeable about the subject. So Caroline, why don't you hop in?
Thank you, sir. That's my boss. I'm very lucky in that. For those who are not from the area, just to give you a little background on this, Los Angeles County Department of Family Services, I'm speaking too fast, is one of the largest child welfare agencies in the nation. We're larger than most states. I have been blessed to have been with the department for almost my entire career, coming up on 30 years with DCFS in August. The vast majority of that time has been working with transition age youth. I call this my pre-retirement position. I actually really love what I do. As Michael said, we do SB 89, and I also do the Expectant Parenting Youth Program. So I have the bookends of this. So I can see on a personal level what happens when we don't do a good job with working with our young people in regards to sexual and reproductive health rights, when we have to bring them in as parents. And they may choose to be parents, and that's absolutely fine. No judgment at all. But sometimes it is a challenge for our foster youth on that. As you've heard, SB 89 has been in effect here in California since 2017. Michael and I are both newer to the program. I think, Michael, you just finished your first year. I'm almost coming up on a year with the program. Prior to this job, I actually was what was known as an SB 89 champion in a regional office. So I bring that information to us and that experience to us, and I found that's really what works. As you've heard, again, we've got several areas of doing this. Training is the first step, obviously, and getting our workers trained, and we have a lot of workers in LA County. And I'm a statistics girl, so I love this, and I look at this every week. Just about 90% of our social workers are trained in SB 89, and that's 90% total. So that includes our workers from the very beginning who are still in the academy, who don't have a caseload and are still learning, all the way up to we also have workers that are not on the line, and they would not be doing this kind of work. To say we have 90%, 9 out of 10 is fantastic. We also have 89% of our supervisors trained in this program. And again, they may be in other programs, but we're doing a really, really good job of training our workers about SB 89 in a formal environment. We take a step further with that, and Michael and I tag team on this, is that we actually go out and do road shows and presentations. We've done them on Teams, webinars, kind of things, but we also do this in person now that we are coming out of the COVID era, where we actually go down and we meet with social workers and staff in offices to really walk them through exactly what is required, but not only that, but exactly how to document it. Because with anything else, as we know in life, if it's not documented properly, it didn't happen. And sometimes we do have some issues with that. Loved seeing the 76%. That's fantastic. I agree with you though. I want to see 100%. And Michael knows I pull up this data every month, and every week, and I'm always looking at it. But we do. One of the challenges we have is getting this is assisting the social workers with documenting, because with a system as large as ours, if you don't click every button correctly, you don't get credit. So we do that. We have some challenges. So we do our training. We talk about what they need to do to inform and what they need to do to remove the barriers. I will say one of our big challenges is getting the information about the sexual and reproductive sex education in schools. That is a challenge with the organization as large as DCFS, as well as the multiple school systems that we have to work with. We also have the issue of our foster kids move around. They just simply do. They move from placement to placement to placement. But we are working with our LA County Office of Child Protection and the local school districts to find a way of doing data matching to ensure that our kids are getting the information that they need. And we love our alternatives via RHEP for our kids that cannot do it, and they can do an online course, and we love that, and are looking at some other online courses to try to find some other options for our kids in regards to that. As of last year, we have to report to the court, and the court officers had to be trained too. Everyone in court has to be trained too. So there really is a lot of oversight here in LA County as to who's doing what, when, where, and how, and ensuring that our youth and young adults get this information. So we're doing better. We are, but again, as Cindy said, I would love to see absolutely 100% on all of this. And one thing we've done recently, and I think that's really been helpful, is that we've redesigned a data report so that workers can go in and their supervisors and their administrators can go in and see when these conversations were held, as example. We get alerts. There's an alert on that says, hey, this was done last year and you haven't done it within this year. So ticklers to remind our workers that conversations are to be had on an annual basis, not just a one and done, like the sex ed portion of it. I think it's very important that we keep up on that, because anyone who works in child welfare understands how busy our social workers are and how much that they actually have to do on any given day. And I lost my train of thought. I got super excited, Michael. As you can see, Michael is right. I get excited about this and I lost my train of thought. Oh, I remember what it is. We have two other things that I'm super excited about that we're doing to try to assist our staff with this. Is that one, we are working on developing an internal web page so that our workers will have one spot where they can go in and find out all the information that they need, as opposed to looking around. That makes it kind of difficult. The other thing that I'm super stoked about is, again, working with RHEP, is that we're doing videos for the workers and that are age appropriate, but we are also making a video that the workers can sit down and have and show the youth and young adults as they're having this conversation. It's not an easy conversation. You know, trust has to be developed between a social worker and a youth and young adult. So in order to have these conversations, so that is a process. But I think by having videos, thank you, RHEP, that workers will feel much more comfortable in doing so. And it also is an entry with the one that we can show the youth, because we know that children, youth, young adults learn differently. So we're giving different ways of introducing this information, ensuring that our youth get that. Okay, I'm going to breathe for a moment. Michael.
I mean, Caroline laid it out there pretty well. The biggest challenge we have often is just getting workers to understand they don't have to have the birds and bees conversation. That's their starting point of thinking they have to lay out sort of the nuts and bolts of the situation, and that's not it at all. Getting them to see it's not as intimidating a prospect as it might appear on the face is half the battle. But I do want to give a big thanks to CLC for enabling RHEP to provide those statistics, because on our end, the compliance numbers of documentation aren't always as encouraging. And it's very heartening to see that youth are reporting that we're following through on this. DCFS has a lot of priorities. The first and foremost, of course, is child safety, but it can be difficult for workers to effectively hit all the many and varied number one priorities that they have to. So knowing that there is actually feedback from foster youth that they're getting the information they need it's kind of a little bit of gas I needed in my tank today. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you both for sharing all of the work that you all are doing. Oh, I'm sorry, Caroline, were you going to share anything else?
No, I was going to toss it back to you unless there were any questions right now that we can answer immediately.
I think we have one question in the Q&A and we have about 2 minutes to answer questions. It says, where could we get trained on SB 89 so that we can provide this education to our county child welfare workers, etc.?
So we actually have, yeah, and I'm not sure where this person is from. It's hard for me to answer on that. For us, we actually have an internal training division that developed our policy for us. But there are, if you go to CDSS, California Department of Social Services, has a wealth of information on their website that is available for all of this. And I think that would be the great starting point.
Also, RHEP and National Center for Youth Law has a fact sheet on SB 89 that lays out exactly what's mandated and what you need to do very clearly, that I'm sure Cindy could provide to anyone. That, it's very handy. We use it with our workers all the time.
And if this was someone, like I said, I didn't see who asked. If it's someone from another child welfare agency in California, feel free to reach out. If you work for one of our fellow agencies, you feel free to reach out to me. That's not a problem. Oh, gotcha. Riverside County. Gotcha. We can touch base later for sure.
Thank you all. Yes, and thanks, Michael, for uplifting that one pager. We will make sure to put it in the chat for folks. And all right, well, thank you both. I had like one or two more questions personally, but because of time, I'm going to save them for the end, and then we can come back to it during our larger Q&A if we don't have too many other questions. But thank you both for sharing all of the work that you all are doing. And, I'm excited to see other folks connect because that's part of what we wanted to do with RHEP, is just connect folks from across California and just share best practices so we can all make sure we're implementing SB 89 and supporting young people. And Nyara, thank you for sharing that fact sheet in the chats. All right, y'all. So we're going to continue on. Thank you both again for all of that. So going to continue on to some more of what did we learn. And right now I'm going to talk specifically about barriers to information and care, and what we heard from young people when it came to the barriers that they were facing. So when we asked young people what made it hard for them to access reproductive health information or services, 57% of youth reported at least one or more barriers. Reported barriers to accessing sexual and reproductive health services and information have increased significantly compared to previous years. So while it's still relatively small, the percentage of youth who reported a barrier accessing STI or STD services more than doubled, from 4% to 10%, when we're comparing combined 2019 and 2021 results to 2023 results. So 4% is a combined 2019-2021 percentage, 10% is what we found in 2023. And the percentage of youth who reported difficulty accessing birth control almost doubled, 5% from 5% to 9% in 2023, and again comparing to a combined result from 2019 and 2021. The questions that we asked young people fell into three different categories. One was personal barriers. We asked them about healthcare and insurance barriers, and we also asked them about caregiver barriers. So personal issues, well, across survey years, personal issue or personal reasons were the most commonly cited barriers to accessing sexual and reproductive health information and services. Youth reported not knowing who to ask for sexual and reproductive health information or where to find this information online at nearly triple the rate of 2019. For folks who identified as female, they were significantly more likely than male identifying folks to say that they didn't know who to ask for information or they didn't know where to find information. Similarly, youth were almost 3 times as likely to say that they were concerned that someone was going to find out that they were accessing sexual and reproductive health care or information as compared to 2019. And feeling uncomfortable talking about sex with adults was a slightly higher in 2023 than it was in 2021 or 2019. And that small increase, while small, was statistically significant. So perhaps not surprisingly, the youngest youth were more likely to cite discomfort when it came to speaking to adults about sexual and reproductive health. They were more likely to cite this barrier as compared to older youth between the ages of 14 and 20. Also, this wasn't statistically significant, but is worth noting that LGBTQ youth also cited feeling more uncomfortable talking about sex with adults. Healthcare and insurance barrier were the second most cited barriers by youth. In 2023, they were young people were 3.8 times more likely to report not having insurance or not knowing how they were going to pay for care. This was surprising to me that older youth, age 17 to 20, were more likely to cite not having insurance or not knowing how to pay as a barrier compared to 14 to 16-year-olds and 12 to 13-year-olds. So older youth cited this barrier at 17%. 14 to 16-year-olds, 3% of 14 to 16-year-olds cited this as a barrier, and 7% of 12 to 13-year-olds cited it as a barrier. Youth were also more likely to report not being able to go to a healthcare provider that they felt comfortable with. And this was more likely to be reported in 2023, with just 22% of young people reporting not finding a healthcare provider they felt comfortable with. Caregiver barriers were the least frequently reported type of barrier. Youth reported caregivers, homes, or STRTPs not letting them go to access sexual and reproductive health care more in 2023 than in other years. And there was a slight increase in youth who didn't want to tell their caregiver or talk to their caregiver because their caregiver wasn't aware of their sexual orientation. All right, I'm going to jump into our next what we learned, but I'm going to just very quickly check the chat to make sure there's no questions. Okay, great. Okay, continuing on. So we also asked young people about the sources of their sources of sexual and reproductive health information. So youth can receive sexual and reproductive health information and support from many sources other than social workers. Family can play an important role in this regard. Schools, caregivers, and healthcare providers also play important roles. So about 89% of youth reported having received information on sexual and reproductive health topics, such as birth control, condoms, sexually transmitted infections, or pregnancy from at least one other source beside their social worker in the previous 12 months. The most frequently cited source of information was schools, followed by healthcare providers. And so I'm going to highlight both of those today. So when it comes to school, we have a law called the California Healthy Youth Act that requires all public and charter schools to provide comprehensive sexual health education using a curriculum that meets state standards, at least once in middle school and once in high school. I mentioned the California Foster Youth Sexual Health Education Act earlier, or SB 89, that requires social workers to confirm that foster youth have received school-based sex ed, and if they have not, that they are required to connect them to a comparable curriculum in the community. So one of the reasons that SB 89 was passed is that we knew many teens in care were missing out on sex ed in schools. Caroline mentioned this as well. They undergo many placement changes during their adolescence. We know that almost half of youth report 4 or more placements by the age of 17. So it's really easy for them to miss this class if they're being switched around in the schools in the middle of middle school or high school. So overall, as I mentioned, school was the most cited resource outside of the social workers. So 67% of youth ages 12 to 20 reported that they received information about sexual and reproductive health in the last year from school. And you can see here also a breakdown by age, with youth 14 to 16 reporting school as their main source, and youth 12 to 13 reporting the least. Healthcare providers also, as I mentioned, are an important source of information. Healthcare providers are in a really wonderful space to be able to provide information, support, and guidance to young people about sexual and reproductive health. in California, we're really lucky to have robust minor consent and confidentiality laws, which means that providers can offer a safe space for youth to be able to ask questions without fear of disclosure. The American Academy of Pediatrics also recommends that regular well-child visits include sexuality education and counseling into care. And youth in foster care are supposed to get regular health visits. I do want to note that in that report that I mentioned earlier from the California Department of Social Services, one of the highlights was that youth in foster care are more likely to access these regular regular well care visits. And so there is a lot of opportunity to have these conversations, or for healthcare providers to have these conversations with them. That being said, as I mentioned, we know that because youth in foster care move around so much, it can be really difficult for them to develop a trusting relationship with a healthcare provider. We hear this a lot from our youth advisory board. And we also know that because youth who are BIPOC and LGBTQ are overrepresented in the foster care system, they often already have experienced bias that leads them to rationally not want to seek sensitive care from certain providers. Okay, and here are some quotes from our youth focus groups. Again, as I mentioned, we get a lot of feedback from them, and they often share with us that it's really hard to build a trusting relationship or to find a provider that they feel comfortable with. And we saw that confirmed in the barriers this year in this survey. Okay, so 61% of youth reported having received sexual and reproductive health information from a healthcare provider in the last year. This number was significantly higher than the average of 2019 and 2021. And a couple of demographic highlights here. Although these demographics were not statistically significant, they are still interesting. So over 90% of white identifying youth reported healthcare providers as a source, compared to 50% of Latino identified youth, 57% of Black identified youth, and 52% of those who identified as other or multiple races. And notably also, again, younger youth were least likely to report conversations with a healthcare provider. I'm quickly going to talk about caregivers and family, because I know we're a little bit behind on time. But in a national poll done by Power to Decide, 52% of teen ages 12 to 15 cited their parents as their most influential as folks who were the most influential on their decisions about sex. As we may know, youth in foster care have often limited or no contact with their biological family. However, and then frequent moves also, again, make it less likely that a young person will develop a trusting relationship with a consistent caregiver or healthcare provider. So in order to increase comfort and skills in providing support to young people in their charge, SB 89 requires that adults seeking to become licensed as resource parents receive information and training on sexual health development. So here are some quotes again from that Constantine study. And here we're hearing from young people about some of their experiences with their caregivers, talking to them or not talking to them about sexual and reproductive health. And we have one from a caregiver as well. So to sum up this section, the proportion here we can see all of the sources of information for young people. We can see that family and caregivers here as well, with family, which is biological family a little bit ahead of caregivers. That being said, the proportion of youth who received information from caregivers was significantly higher than the average of 2019 and 2021. So we are seeing improvement in increase in these conversations. And to sum up that section, the folks least likely to receive information from sources were, again, 12 to 13-year-olds. We saw this in 2021 as well. So it is important that we continue to support our younger youth and are able to have these conversations with them as well. Okay. So that was a lot of information. We are now going to bring in our youth panel, which I'm sure you all have been really excited to hear from. And we're going to talk to them a little bit about all this information that we just received and their thoughts on that. So I'm going to welcome Brandy, Lonell, and Mariah, who are part of our Youth Advisory Board this year. So welcome, y'all. See. All right, I see you. Welcome. Sorry, I was having a hard time seeing you all on my screen. I have too many windows up, but welcome. We're super excited to chat with you. I just wanted to give you all some time to introduce yourselves. Are you comfortable unmuting yourselves and just introducing yourselves?
I'll go just to break the silence. Hi everyone, I'm Brandy. I use she, her pronouns. This is my second year on the Youth Advisory Board.
For sure, I can go. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yes, my name is Lonell. I use him pronouns, and this is my first year being the advisory board member.
Hello, and I'm Mariah. I'm from Stockton, California, and this is my first year as well on the Youth Advisory Board.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. And again, welcome. So I'm going to start us off with just kind of an icebreaker question. What most surprised you from all of this data that you heard today? What most resonated for you all? Were there any moments where you felt like, yes, that totally makes sense?
I can talk on that one. I think barriers to accessing healthy relationships was probably the most surprising thing, that was like the biggest barrier for young people. I think for me, my social worker was kind of that first model of a healthy relationship for me. So it's surprising to hear that, but I hope that more people can start modeling that behavior for the young people that they're working with.
I feel like the just youth reporting barriers in general, I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, having gone through that myself. But then what surprised me was that like healthcare and insurance came up. Just because now I'm like, oh, I feel very lucky because that was never like something I thought of as a barrier. So it's just kind of crazy knowing that so many people saw that as one.
Yes, and I think for me, what was surprising was more than half of foster youth experiencing barriers to SRH care and info. We talked about like there are so many, I would say, initiatives and bills, laws that have been intended to educate foster youth and inform them of their rights and provide access to services. So it's really surprising that folks have still expressed running into these obstacles. And I also, just because through reading research, I've seen that a lot of other groups have expressed barriers to SRH care as well. So I'm like, where is the action behind everyone saying they're experiencing the same barriers? So then that's kind of what I'm surprised about. There isn't any collective action to help folks and lowering these high numbers of barriers that we see. So that was one thing that shocked me. I think one thing that resonated, it made total sense, was that social workers can help foster youth, right, overcome these obstacles. I think just in my experience, when I've had social workers that were knowledgeable, approachable, it made a huge difference in me, like asking questions and attempting to reach out for services and care.
Thanks, y'all. Okay, so I'm gonna jump into another question. Let's see. As you mentioned, Lonel, the number of youth reporting barriers to accessing care and information and in terms of sexual and reproductive health is increasing. So 57% reported experiencing one or more barriers. We saw high increase in barriers to accessing STI and STD testing and birth control as well. Why do you all think that is? What has been your experience or the experience of people that you know in accessing these services?
I can speak on birth control specifically. I feel like in my experience, like one of the major barriers, especially if you're under 18, is that like you have to get a trusted adult on your side because chances are like you don't really have transportation to get there. You probably don't understand how to give them your insurance and all these other things that you need to like get there to the appointment to get the birth control. And I feel like for like, especially for women under 18, there's just a lot of stigma. And then you like add on the stigma of like, oh, well, I'm also in foster care. Oh, well, I'm also Latinx. Oh, well, I'm also LGBT. And then people just kind of get this idea in their head. They're like, well, you don't need birth control, like, or they don't see it as like a priority. And then like in my experience, like I just wanted it to get rid of my period because I was like, I'm tired of this. And I only found out that like certain forms got rid of it because I like did research at the library. But like a lot of my friends had no idea, and like other people in foster care, they're like, "Oh, I thought it was just like the pill, and it just keeps you from getting pregnant, so I probably don't need it." But there's like other benefits. Um, but then like on top of that, it's like not even just with like workers and foster parents and stuff like stigmatizing you. It's like, oh, you go to school and you say like, oh, I'm on birth control. Then you get slut shamed, and it's just like it kind of makes you think about like when you're under 18, like, oh, is it even worth me going to get it for these other benefits? Like if social workers and foster parents and my friends at school and all these other people are gonna like treat me a certain way and like stigmatize me. So I feel like that's one of like the biggest barriers is just like social stigma.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Brandy. That is so true. Lonel, I see you unmuted yourself. Go for it.
Yes, I would say one of the things I think is overlooked, that I think we uncovered via like some surveys that we did with youth is that a lot of youth express a gap in knowledge around what sexual and reproductive health services and resources were available to them. So they were saying they didn't know where to find info and how to navigate healthcare systems efficiently. And then also similar to the findings that we saw, the concerns around privacy and confidentiality that have, I would say, deterred youth from seeking these essential services. I think in my experience, I went out of state for undergrad. And so I had an experience where I had to go to this emergency dental office. And I had to get all my wisdom teeth taken out at one time. And I waited till the last minute. So they were all impacted. I had to pay like $800 out of pocket to get this done. And it was kind of my social worker was really helpful because they, I guess, medical house in California. So since I was out of state, they were like, oh, like, you could come out of pocket, maybe reimburse you. And I was just like, okay, like, counting pennies trying to get this procedure done. After kind of felt rushed, and he prescribed like this ibuprofen. And I was like, oh, I've never heard of anybody getting ibuprofen after, once they take it out. And he was like, had this research, like, oh, like we're saying you don't need like strong drugs anymore. This is the normal way to do things. So long story short, I ended up getting stomach ulcers because the ibuprofen was so strong. And I wasn't like, and so like, yeah, it was hitting my stomach lining. And so I had to go to the doctor again to get more medicine to like make my stomach acid weaker. And I was just like, I felt like in that one instance, I was like, when I talked to the doctor or the dentist that prescribed the medicine, I didn't say like it's because I'm Black, but I know that my peers who got their taken out, they got other medications. So I was kind of like, oh, so I think that I guess my progression for me, I didn't go to the doctor after freshman year. That whole since I was in college, I was like, yeah, but wait, I wait to go back home, or go to community centers. I think that experience I kind of felt, um, yeah, it really just scared me from like being open or asking questions. So I was like, wait, like now I don't want him to think I was, one of those people that are like on drugs or anything. But yeah, I kind of was like, why did I get a different experience than my white peers? And I think that's one of the things I think we uncover as well is that you have to find a doctor, healthcare provider that is sensitive to your needs, right? That is culturally competent, and I think that's one thing I was missing. And once I started to find, I'm like, okay, cool. Like this is what I know is missing. And when I see youth that have the same experience, I'm like, well, it's okay to shop for doctors. It really is. And I would have told myself, listen, not this dentist, go to another one, ask questions up front. And I think that's what I think is what's been missing is you have to understand that if you have a bad experience, it's not going to be every experience, and you do have to communicate with your doctor, and it's a two-way communication. But I think that's not as knowledgeable, or everybody doesn't know that. So I think that maybe that's why barriers are increasing. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
Oh my gosh, Linnell, I'm so sorry you had that experience. Yeah. And like you said, I think we saw a lot in the data. Another barrier was that youth have a hard time finding a provider they feel comfortable with. And it's likely like they've had a lot of just bad experience and compounding their identities. Are they BIPOC, LGBTQ, right? Do they have maybe a disability, like compounding their identities on top of just already not even be able to find a healthcare provider. It just makes everything so much worse. And Brandy, you mentioned also the stigma around just being in foster care, right? And I've heard a lot from y'all on the youth advisory board about how, yeah, on top of everything, I'm a foster youth and there's already certain perceptions about me, like just with that alone on top of who I am and all my other identities. So it makes it so difficult. Thank you both for sharing that. I'm gonna move us on to our next question. So as we saw, social workers play an important role in helping youth access care. 1 in 4 youth reported that their social worker helped them overcome a barrier to accessing care or information. The data also shows that social workers can play an important role in sharing information. But what we learned is that for conversations to work, the content of the conversation is really important. And it's also important to ensure that youth feel comfortable during the conversation. How can social workers, or really anyone, because we saw other folks are sources of information as well, providers, caregivers, schools, make youth, especially our younger youth, feel comfortable having conversations? And that's a big question to ask.
I can start. I feel like for this conversation, just for anything with foster care in general, to get youth to like feel comfortable enough to talk to you and get to the point to have this conversation, I feel like social workers need to treat youth like people and not like a case. Because I noticed that that happens a lot. And it's like, okay, every person is individual. Like, say just because one of the youth you're working with is like gonna have a baby and ready to have kids, that doesn't mean that all of them are like the same. And then also kind of just like putting your biases to the side and being like, okay, you might hear, oh, foster youth are this way or whatever, but you need to just get to know like everyone as an individual person. And I feel like that's the key to like getting people to talk to you and open up to you, and then being able to have like conversations about reproductive health care.
Yes, Brandon, I think that was perfect. I was like nodding. So I was like, that's what I was saying as well. I cannot stress enough how important it is to build like a good rapport, right, with folks. And I think what has to be the center of that is just being genuine and sincere. I know for me, I was, I was kind of like, I would not, I think that was the one thing that limited me from how I would communicate with my social worker is I don't know you. I'm not gonna tell you all my business. That's just that. Like, what do you think? Like, and so I think like I have to see like, you know, they do care about me as a person, and that allowed me to like, oh yeah, this is what I have going on. This is what I'm unsure about, or this is where I want to know more. Um, but yeah, because I'm like, I think it's both ways. Like, I think they sometimes it seems as a case, but sometimes not all social workers are the same, and so you have some good ones. You have some ones I'm like, okay, we're here. We're just gonna, you know, keep we're here to like check boxes, and I think that so yeah, making sure that that's rapport is there, and that you're asking um yeah, like, questions that are helping you know who they are as a person. So that means like listening, showing empathy, giving information in a clear, relatable way. Um, and it's crucial to know that it can't be rushed. Something has to be built over time. And tailoring the conversation to that particular youth, their age, their background can make a huge difference, making them feel comfortable. I think in my experience, I remember when I was in middle school, a social worker knew I liked to read books, and they had bought my first book series. Not, I didn't write one, but the book series that I read, which is Game of Thrones. And I remember this because it was the first book series I owned. I was like, wow, I have all three books. I remember using my allowance to get all the banners and posters, and I was so excited to talk about the books when my social worker came. And I think that personal connection is what made me feel valued and more comfortable discussing other topics.
Yeah, and to that, I'll just add, obviously connecting with your clients has already been said, but I think that in more conversations than just this one, it's going to help to ease some of the tension and other things. If you're expecting them to come and report, you know, graduations or things like bad things that might be going on in their homes, these are also, you know, connecting with them ahead of time makes it so that they feel safe enough and comfortable enough to do so. The other thing that I would say is bring relevant material to the client. So if you know that someone needs more education on a certain topic, um, be ready with that ahead of time if you can, or if you know your client already. And then try to use all facts and not as much opinion, because we already come into the conversation feeling judged.
Thank you all for that. Yeah, all of everything that you all said is so incredibly important, and I really like what you all said too around it takes time, right? Like a genuine relationship, it takes time, and really getting to know someone. So thank you all for sharing that. Okay, our next question is on insurance barriers. So we saw that youth were 3.8 times more likely to report not having insurance or not knowing how they would pay for care, with older youth more likely to cite this as a barrier to care. That's really notable because all foster youth in California are supposed to have Medi-Cal. So what are your thoughts on this? Why might this be named as a barrier? And what can we do to support youth and better understanding how to navigate insurance? Because we know insurance is difficult. It's not easy to navigate. So what is some advice that you all have?
I could talk about an experience I had. So something I didn't realize when I was in the non-minor dependent side of foster care. After I left them and moved counties, I didn't realize I was going to have to transfer my Medi-Cal. And then when I did go to do that, I just called my local welfare office and thought that's how I was going to do it. And it turned out there was like a whole specific person for foster care Medi-Cal. And I had to call the county that I used to reside in, not the county that I now reside in. So there was like a 6-month holdup where my newborn and I didn't have medical care because we didn't have insurance that was valid. Or, you know, at the time we just drove all the way to San Jose to get our care, which was over 2 hours. We needed it done. But yeah, so just knowing ahead of time who to contact, how to contact them, and what things to ask for. It ended up being a super simple phone call, but the problem was finding out who I was supposed to be getting on the phone with. So that's something that could be a lot easier, is making sure that your non-minor dependent young people are prepared and they know who they can call for things like Medi-Cal and a lot of other things.
Thanks for that, Mariah. Yeah, there are one of the things as a former sex educator, one of the things I often think about is we have so many resources, yet there's still like barriers in accessing those resources, right? Or folks don't know who to call, and there's a lot of information out there, but there's still work to do in kind of connecting those dots or getting youth that information directly, or, you know, kind of sometimes maybe it's just simplifying things for them because there's just too many phone numbers, too many websites. So thank you for that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, we have one more question because we're running up closely on time. So given everything that we learned today, and this question is for everyone in the group, what are your recommendations for those working with and supporting youth in foster care?
I feel like I have a lot actually. Like being consistent, or like keeping your word. So I feel like, yeah, we're gonna talk about this. Just make sure that you do. And then also just like being open-minded and not judging youth. Like it was discussed earlier, there's like disproportionate amounts of like LGBTQ youth. Um, and then I don't know, in like everywhere I've been in care, there's like a lot of like Black and Latinx youth as well. So just like keeping an open mind and like what I said earlier, like getting to know them as a person instead of just doing whatever you want, I guess. And then just being supportive of like their decisions and like kind of keeping your stigmas and stuff at home. So like say if a youth is like, oh, I want to start birth control, like don't be like, oh, you're too young to have sex or whatever you want. Like just support them and like what they want to do and like do what's best for the youth.
Yeah, I would just say come into every conversation knowing that a lot of us face trauma. And so come in sensitive and ready to kind of hold extra space for things like that too sometimes. But yeah, development of us is the development of a whole community. We're the leaders because we're kids, you know. So making sure that you're remembering that we are going into the world as adults and, you know, as better prepared we can be would be great.
Yes, and I would say I think something that I think needs to be done is just more accessible youth-friendly resources that are available online and in person. Um, so like folks being knowledgeable of community resources that can help folks to navigate their own needs effectively. I think this also links to my next one is addressing the larger, I would say, social determinants of health, right? We know that there are other things going on in folks' lives that they need help with. And so I think like trying to solve one problem, you need to solve another one to get to that problem, right? And so understanding that, and I think keeping in mind that foster youth are people, they have agency and autonomy as well. And so asking them about their daily lives, what they think would help make a difference for them, and then providing resources to that. So like folks that, you know, need more nutrition, like providing food vouchers or yeah, I think anything that you could think of helping to folks to better navigate their own lives. Yeah, I think that's my takeaway today.
Thanks, y'all. Well, it's been a pleasure getting to chat and learn from you all. As always, I enjoy any time that I get with you all. So thank you for sharing your knowledge, your wisdom with us. We really appreciate it. I'm going to check to see if there are any questions in the chat because we're going to transition to questions for any of our panelists. So for our youth panelists or for Caroline and Michael, any questions that have come up for folks? I see lots of love for you all in the chat right now. Okay, I don't think I see any questions coming in, just a lot of love for you all. So thank you all for joining us today to our panels. We have to our attendees, please do not leave yet. We have a couple more things to share with you all, but to our panelists, thank you all, Lanelle, Mariah, Brandy, thank you for joining us today for our webinar. So I'm going to keep us going, just a couple more things for you all. If there are questions or if you're processing all of this really important information, please continue to add questions in the chat. If we don't get to them by the time we close, we will follow up, as I mentioned earlier. But I do want to share some resources with you all before we depart. I want to highlight our RHEP podcasts, which are something we are really proud of and have been done in partnership with our Youth Advisory Board. We have our Fostering Parenthood podcast, which is a podcast that was created to help caregivers start to have these really important conversations with young people. And so while it is geared for caregivers, I would say anybody that works with young people can learn from it. We have some really amazing conversations. Our host, Dorothy Daniels, is a caregiver herself. So, and we have a lot of our Youth Advisory Board members come on our Fostering Parenthood podcast as well. So really great resources. And then another podcast we're really proud of is our Self-Taught podcast, which was recently featured in the Washington Post. So if you haven't seen that article, I do want to highlight it for you all. Our Self-Taught podcast is led by our Youth Advisory Board. It's a collection of conversations that they wish they would have had when they were younger. And so we have some really amazing topics. We just released our second season. So even if you, this one's geared for youth. So if you have young people in your lives that you're working with, please share with them. I also listen to it and learn a lot from it. So I suggest you listen to it as well. Even if you don't, if you're not in the youth category, there's a lot to learn as well. And then I also want, because we talked about healthcare providers today and those really important conversations, I do want to highlight our foster-friendly healthcare toolkit, which is a toolkit that was created for healthcare providers specifically to help them provide better care to foster youth. So it's a really fantastic resource. We're going to be doing trainings on this in the future. So please, if you need more information, let us know. But it's on our website, and our team will be dropping those links in the chat as well for you all to access it. And then last but not least, we are sharing our report with you all, our youth report that we just talked about today. So you can access it via this bit.ly link. You can access it via the QR code. You may also access it in the chat. There should be a link there. But please, as I mentioned earlier, check it out. There's a lot of really important information. There's more detail than what we were able to go into today during our webinar, but a lot of great information here for you all to be able to dig into. And I think that's it. Let me see if there's any more questions in the chat. Kim, thank you for dropping all of those links. Oh, I see one question for the panel. We have a couple more minutes so we can take the question. And I think this is for our youth. So you shared being treated like an individual. Can you share what that looks like, being treated? So Brandy, I think this goes back to the well, so all of you mentioned how important it is to be treated as an individual. And Brandy, I'm thinking about what you said. It's important to be treated like an individual and not like a case, which is really important. So can you tell us a little bit more about what that looks like?
Yeah. So I feel like as far as being treated like an individual, like the best way I can describe it is like I don't like treating them like you know them, because I feel like workers, they have the opportunity to get to know the youth from like constant contact. So it's like if I see you and or I guess one example, like with one of my workers, I kept telling them like, oh, I'm not interested in sex. I didn't know I was asexual back then, but like, so I kept telling them that, and I'm like, oh, I want birth control, but they kind of just like forgot. And I'm like, that's kind of a key detail about who I am as a person. It would be really nice if you remembered that. So just like remembering important details about each individual person. Like, I don't even care if you take notes while I'm talking. Like, it's just like weird when it feels like, from my perspective, like, oh, I'm just being treated as if I'm any other youth. And kind of like Linnell said, like it's not every worker obviously, but some of them kind of act like they're there to like check boxes and then just like leave. And we don't like that. Like we want to feel like we have a connection with you and like you actually like remember like who we are as a person.
I think for me, what that ended up meaning too was that, like we were talking about earlier, I was facing some other things at the same time as well. So for me, what that meant was, preparing to have a child, I also had to prepare to stay sober. So for me, that was another journey that I had to go down. And my social worker, not only knowing that, but acknowledging it and being ready to offer services for a lot of things. Actually, I got to go through a rehab after having my child, where they also taught me how to bond as a mother with her baby. And that was just amazing. That was really what I needed to be able to get through those moments in time. But another thing that my social worker did to really make sure that I was getting that custom treatment was go out of her way to meet the father of my child and make sure that he as well was offered services. Because we were both, going to be younger parents. And she was like, I recognize this as a challenge. Let's see what we can do to combat that. And those were some really helpful things for me. My son's 5 years old and thriving nowadays. So definitely custom treatment is all I needed.
All right. Well, we are at time. Thank you. Thank you all for coming back and answering that last question for us. And thank you all for joining us for our webinar today. There should be a survey popping up at the end of once you close out Zoom. So please give us your feedback. Let us know what you think. But other than that, have a good day. Thank you all for joining us.